This is Terry White, author of the Better Minneapolis newsletter and podcast host. I'd like to invite you to become a paid subscriber. You'll gain access to the archive, exclusive live chats, and happy hours. Most importantly, you'll be supporting this reader-supported effort to bring news and commentary focused on Minneapolis to a broader audience. Thank you for listening to today's interview. All right, hello. Today I'm here with Amanda Harrington, who's the director of the Neighborhood Safety Department. Welcome.
Thank you.
Great. Why don't you take a minute and just introduce yourself and your background and describe your role?
Sure. As you said, I'm the director of neighborhood safety. I've been in that role not quite 2 months, so it's still fairly new. My background is really all public service. So I've been committed to serving the community and primarily the city of Minneapolis, although I had a few jobs outside of the city. But about 15 years as a social worker, doing therapy, play therapy with kids. I was a school social worker with Minneapolis Public Schools for 10 years. And then while I was there, I thought it would be fun to go to law school. It was not, in case you're wondering. But I did it. It took me 4 years, so I finished law school, and then I ended up at the Hennepin County Attorney's Office.
Okay.
So I did juvenile prosecution, and then child abuse cases, child protection, and then took over their truancy program for a while before I came to the city. And then was the first person in the city to work on the design and implementation work, creating the community safety ecosystem.
So I don't want to get too off track, but were you familiar with the Hennepin County Homeschool?
Yep.
Was that so?
Yep.
That's actually what brought my wife and I out here, is because she worked there.
When I was still a social worker, that was still around, and so it was one of those things where I definitely considered doing an internship there, and particularly wanting to work with youth. That seemed like a really a good option. My specialty tended to be mental health with younger kids.
Yeah.
So the ones that were too young to go to the county homeschool. And then it was still around just a tiny bit when I was at the county attorney's office before they closed it for good.
Well, I keep bringing it up, hoping that it will come back before they just sell the property to the golf course. Okay, but let's talk about the Neighborhood Safety Department. It's gone through a lot of leadership changes, and I think it's also changed departments, right? It was under health, maybe?
It used to be part of the health department, and
Right.
then when the city restructured and the Office of Community Safety was created, neighborhood safety became its own department, one of the 5 that are under the Office of Community Safety. So Commissioner Barnett, as the Commissioner of Community Safety, oversees neighborhood safety, 911, emergency management, fire, and police.
And I bring that up because I know some people question maybe why it got moved out of the health department, and there's been some I don't know, transitional friction that occurred, and so it's part of my question as to what motivated you to step into this role. It seems like it's a tough job.
I hear that a lot. You're not the first person to say it's a tough job. Yeah, there's been some transition. I think anytime you go through a significant transition in a small or large organization, there's a lot of change management that needs to be put into place. And this was a significant transition, not just for neighborhood safety, which used to be the Office of Violence Prevention, but like I said, it was the whole city that was moving to a strong mayor system, a whole new office and commissioner position created, departments working together that had really been siloed in the past. And I wasn't around for all of that. I was not part of the organization, but certainly over my last year and a half, I've seen significant changes, and a lot of them for the better, quite honestly. So this actually gets to your question of why. I was really excited to continue my career of public service and stay with the city, and this department seemed like a really good way to do that. I've seen them, just since the time that I've been with the city, create a lot of really good financial practices, put policies into place where they didn't have them before. They were creating a department from scratch, and I saw a team being formed who was doing it. So it kind of went from nothing, or people that had come over and had the support of a full health department, and then they built it up. And it felt like this was a really great way for me to continue serving youth, families, and really just the whole city of Minneapolis.
So maybe you could give us an overview of what it is exactly that the department does now. I think there's a lot of confusion. I hear different things from different people. And just for example, I know there's a difference between violence interrupters and safety ambassadors, but I don't know that everyone fully understands those differences.
We're still working on those definitions internally as well.
Okay.
But there is a difference. So neighborhood safety is one of, I said, the 5 departments under the Office of Community Safety, and their role is really important in the community safety ecosystem, which, before I go further, I should probably explain, because I know people are like, what are you talking about? An ecosystem? This isn't the environment. But when we're talking about community safety, we're talking about not just crime and violence, but also addressing the root causes of crime and violence. And that means that we have to have services related to prevention, response, and restoration, and that the people who provide those services aren't just the city, aren't just the county. We also need to work with community service providers. We also have to work with business owners, other the state, the parks, Metro Transit, all of those partners and individual community members have to work together for this community safety ecosystem to work. And so part of what neighborhood safety does is they're clearly not the police, they're not the fire, right? They're not a lot of the emergency services. But I talked about those 3 buckets being prevention, response, and restoration. So prevention is one of the huge things that neighborhood safety does, violence prevention in particular. And then restoration. So when people have been harmed, gun violence, for example, they have services that can come in and help people recover. And I always think prevention and restoration are a little squishy, because what might be prevention for one person is restoration for another person. But that's really the role of neighborhood safety right now. They also used to do some response with behavioral crisis response, but that got moved to fire.
Okay. Well, I think of restoration as the sort of the after effects, right?
Yep.
Dealing with helping someone get back on their feet if they've been a victim of crime, or is that?
Yeah, exactly right. So, for example, one of the services that neighborhood safety funds is Next Step, which actually works through Hennepin Healthcare. And so if somebody is impacted by gun violence in our community and they end up in the hospital, Next Step will come in, interact with that person, interact with their family. They're getting the victim of the gunshot services, which might be connecting them with ongoing health care, because you can imagine there might be ongoing health concerns after being shot, but also mental health. They're also trying to reduce retribution in the community. So if it's a gang or group involved shooting, there's other players involved, and there might be other victims down the road. And so they get involved and try and kind of cool tempers, prevent people from trying to retaliate, and do that longer term checking in with folks. That's a piece that is both prevention and restoration. They're certainly coming in and helping people recover from the trauma of being shot, but they're also preventing additional violence that could occur down the road.
So I know you're working on the definitions, but how are violence interrupters and safety ambassadors, how do you explain that to people in its current definition?
Yeah. So the violence interrupters are based on the cure violence model, which really believes that violence is contagious, like the measles or chickenpox, and that we can stop that contagion by sending trusted messengers into the community to stop it. And so what the violence interrupters are supposed to do is go to areas that are known to have violence. We looked at data around gun violence, assaults, for example, and we put them into neighborhoods where they have relationships, and they use their knowledge and relationships in the community to go places where they know violence is likely to occur or where they hear it's going to occur, and they cool things down.
Do they interact with all ages, or is it just focused on young, or?
All ages.
Okay.
And unfortunately, gun violence and assaults don't have an age limit in our area. So they're definitely working with youth, adults, all over the place. but their goal is to prevent violence. Right? They're not a cure-all for everything in the community. And so their goal is not to necessarily provide housing for people who are unhoused or provide treatment for people who are suffering from drug addiction. They may do that when they encounter people as they're trying to reduce violence, because they do have case managers who do that. But their primary goal is not to seek those people out. It's to stop violence happening in our community. And I'll give you a good example. I was out with Restoration Inc. recently, who works on the north side. And we were at one of the libraries over there. And we're talking to a lady and her kids. And we were about to leave, and another woman came out, and they got into an argument. Their team stayed and talked with both of those women, separated them out, talked to them to make sure that they wouldn't go after each other after we were gone. That could have turned into a physical altercation in front of kids and other patrons at that library. And instead, everybody went their separate ways, and it was fine. Another example, they encountered a young person at a gas station who had a gun. And there was another group there that was kind of teasing him. That could have gone really badly.
Sure, yeah.
And what they did was they got the young person separated from the folks who were teasing him, and he went on his way. So they prevented a shooting and potentially a physical altercation that day. That's what they're there for. The safety ambassadors, on the other hand, are more modeled based off of the Downtown Improvement District safety ambassadors. They're safety through physical presence on the street. They show that we care about our community. So they have really recognizable shirts. In this case, they're blue. They say safety ambassadors on them. They're checking in with people. They're checking in with businesses to see how it's going. They're checking in with anybody that they meet on the street. Now, some of those people might, again, be unhoused. It is their job to check in with them and say, do you need any resources? And if that person says yes, it's their job to know the resources they can connect them to. There are Hennepin County social workers on Lake Street that they can call in and come talk to that person. They can refer to Let Everyone Advance with Dignity so that they can have ongoing case management. They carry Narcan and first aid kits so that they can be addressing those issues. And this summer we'll also have a dispatcher in place so that community members could actually call us up and say, hey, can you send a safety ambassador down here? There's somebody who won't leave my doorway, for example, or there's somebody who I think is asleep. I don't want to call the police, but I really want somebody to check on them. They can be dispatched to do those type of livability and safety issues. What they do that's different from downtown is they're really not intended to be kind of doing the street cleanup. That takes a lot more people than we have funding for. But you can see how their roles are different.
So when we first met, it was at one of the Uptown events that they had, and they were wanting, I think, the safety ambassadors to be more in Uptown, and you kind of explained that there's a pilot happening. Maybe you could just refresh my memory as to, so the pilot, what is it and where is it?
The city council allocated $3 million for safety ambassadors in 11 areas of Minneapolis. And to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars, we decided to pilot the program in 2 areas before because we hadn't done safety ambassadors. We saw the model that was downtown, but that's also privately funded. So they have different resources than we had to work on this. We looked at data, and the areas that we had significant need were Lake Street. There was a lot of gun violence and other livability issues, and Franklin Avenue. We had heard a lot from particularly the Native American community that we didn't have resources in that area. And the data backed up the need, certainly. And so the East Lake Street Cultural Corridor and the Franklin Avenue Cultural Corridor are the 2 pilot sites. The services started the last week of May, and so we have safety ambassadors working 5 days a week on both of those strips of the city, and we've had positive feedback so far. Okay,
yeah, and I mean, not a long time, right, to gather data, but and so are they? What hours do they walk the street? Do they talk to business owners? Are they out past midnight? What does the pilot look like?
They are walking the street. Their hours are actually daytime hours, and I didn't expect that going into the pilot. As we were planning, we talked with a lot of community folks in both of the cultural corridors to see what they needed. We talked to business owners, we talked to schools, for example, and just other community folks in the area. And a lot of what we heard was it wasn't safe for kids even getting to schools in the area, having to walk around homeless encampments, not feeling safe going to public transit stops. And so that ended up being how we chose daytime hours. It's 8 to 4:30, which matched when students at South High School, for example, were going to and from school. Now that never covers everybody. Some people have after school sports, but we were trying to catch the majority of folks. Of course, we started at the end of the school year, so that only lasted a little while, but the nice thing about the pilot is it's always meant to be iterative. We look all the time to see, is the service out when it should be? We didn't want to change it immediately, just having got it out, but we're taking data constantly, and we'll go back and look and see if they should be out later hours. I know some people, not everybody, want them to be out later. You talked about maybe being out till midnight, but I also don't know that was the need for the Franklin or the Lake Street corridors. It's really a business corridor that has different needs than some other parts of our city.
Well, I mean, if people are shopping and going to work or school, I mean, obviously that happens the most during the day.
Right.
I don't know if have you had a chance to go out with any of these new groups that are walking yet, or is that on your?
It's on my list. The safety ambassadors I'm trying to find a good chunk of afternoon or morning so that I can actually get out with them and spend some time.
So this department is part of the overall community safety office, and you mentioned what that consists of. It's 911, it's fire, it's police.
Emergency management is the one.
Okay.
Yep, and then neighborhood safety.
Okay, all right. What does emergency management do? How's that different?
So think about if there was a large-scale natural disaster in our city, emergency management would pick up. They were instrumental when the bridge collapsed, for example.
Right. Okay. And some of the people that sort of have been critical of the program have been the city council itself. I think a lot of that was more directed at your predecessor. But I'm just wondering, how has the new pilot helped them to come on board? Have you felt that you're making progress with building bridges there?
The city council, I think like everybody, like all of our community members, want information. And so it's just taken time. But I feel like the increased communication, relationship building that I've been doing with them in my previous role, but also that folks in neighborhood safety have been doing with them is paying off. There's been a lot of communication in that you see us presenting to city council a lot behind the scenes. I send a lot of emails. We have individual meetings with them. I've been going to a lot of community meetings with city council members who are having safety meetings with their constituents. And so I think they're getting more information than they used to, which is helping them just better understand the programs, better understand the data that we're collecting, and trusting that we're moving in the right direction.
When you go to community meetings with them and present, do you find that the public is supportive, or how do they react?
I think just like city council, our community is not a monolith, and so it can vary depending on the group.
Okay, all right.
Within the group.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, there's been a lot of, I would say, several unflattering stories about billing in particular. There was one about double billing with Hennepin County by one of the groups, whether it was intentional or not. And I know I've heard Commissioner Barnett and yourself and others talk about putting in processes to better shore up the invoicing and stuff. So I'm just, two questions, I guess. I'm wondering how that's going. And then I'm also wondering if Hennepin County is doing some of this work, are we duplicating their efforts, or maybe how those two things are different?
Yeah, good questions. The short answer is it's going really well.
Okay.
I'm guessing you want me to expand on that. I talked in the beginning about part of the reason I wanted to come to this department was they had a really good team who was doing good work. They have an associate director of compliance, an associate director of finance. Those two and the folks that work with them in neighborhood safety have put together policies, procedures, trainings that have really solidified the checks and balances in neighborhood safety. So it's very clear in contracts for all of the service providers that we work with what is expected of them for invoices to be paid. And then we back it up with additional trainings because we know we're working with a variety of community organizations. Some of them are big and robust and have great financial systems, and some are really small, right? And so we have to be able to meet each of them where they're at.
And why are there so many? I think, aren't there like 40 different groups or something like that? I mean, why not have every company I've worked at will have like 6 vendors, right? So, but it seems like there's quite a few more than that. How come so many?
Well, I don't know why Minneapolis is rich in service vendors. It's something I talk to my counterparts in St. Paul a lot. But we talk about that's the difference between St. Paul and Minneapolis is we actually have a lot of service providers. We have a lot of nonprofits that do safety work here that they maybe don't have across the river. I think to your answer of why do we have so many, they do different things.
Okay.
Some are really focused on...
and they're kind of maybe neighborhood specific.
Right,
like
opioid use. And they have deep relationships in South Minneapolis, and others are really focused more on gun violence in North Minneapolis. And so you can't just take that and hope that they do well in a different part of the city or in a different service area. That's setting them up to fail.
Okay. And so what about that kind of question, the second part there, Hennepin County and the city of Minneapolis, how do they work together better to make sure they're not duplicating?
It's one of the things I'm super excited about since I came from the county. I have some really good relationships from when I worked there. And so neighborhood safety is starting to work really closely with the Safe Communities team in the county that has a lot of violence prevention programming as well. The city and the county have always had this...
is that Safety Communities, is that kind of their name for their department?
Safe Communities is the name of their department in Hennepin County, yep. Not confusing at all. We like to throw safe and communities and neighborhoods and everything. So we work closely with them so that we don't duplicate efforts, because we know there are things that we're doing that are the same, but it's not completely the same. So they serve, for example, the entirety of Hennepin County. And so if they're working with youth who are group or gang involved, they can be getting referrals from Bloomington and from the Brooklyns. And in Minneapolis, we serve Minneapolis. They also serve Minneapolis, but it's so much bigger than that. So it's one of the things that we're working on is looking at maps of where our service providers to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts. We certainly talk a lot about funding and invoicing, and in some cases we're trying to get some of our language with contracts to align because it's also very confusing for vendors. We're never going to be exactly the same because we're different organizations, and we're trying to respect that, by law in Minnesota, they are the social service provider in the area. And going back to that community safety ecosystem, they can't do everything by themselves. And so we can step in where there are gaps and fill those gaps.
Okay. I'm just wondering, I was just thinking, like, if there's a big event, do safety ambassadors or anything get involved? Are they ever assigned to, like, hey, we're having Taste of Minnesota, we want to have, or they don't do that kind of thing?
I think in the past they probably have done some of that, and in the past we weren't always following the cure violence model either. So what we would do now is if there's an event within a community where the violence interrupters have a relationship, they would be there. Same thing with community ambassadors. If there's a big celebration along Lake Street, we would ask them to flex their hours so that they could be part of that celebration. But we're not necessarily going to pick up somebody who has a relationship and expertise in a specific area and move them across town to a big celebration in Northeast if they've never worked there before.
So how do you plan to measure success, right? Like this pilot has only been on for a little bit. I'm not sure how long the violence prevention has gone on. I think, it's the whole cure violence idea. I mean, secondhand to you, I doubt most of the people listening to this have any idea what that means.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering, just for the regular resident, how do they know that their money's being well spent, that the program is a success? I mean, because we've seen violence drop in the city. It's impossible, it seems, to know, like, is the neighborhood safety department partly responsible for that? Or so what's that outcome a year from now that you say to yourself, we've got it right, or no, we need to change? And what are the kind of metrics that you measure along the way to determine if you've been a success?
Well, each contract is going to have some nuance in exactly what we're measuring. And there's certainly a lot of things that are outputs and not outcomes, right? Number of people that we encounter, or number of resources that we gave out. But I think if we look more broadly at the department, the success is, do people feel safer in our community, right? Even if the statistics show that our community is safer, if people don't feel safer, our job isn't done.
Right.
And so that's got to be part of all of our metrics, is actually asking people how they feel. And so there's a survey element to that. There's a checking in with people who have had a service and people who have never had a service or encountered a violence prevention program. But if they feel safer, that's how we're going to know if we're doing the right job. Okay.
And so you mentioned collecting, like, how many contacts there are. Are there any other things that come to mind that you're starting to collect now that would kind of make people feel like stuff's happening?
We've actually been collecting a lot of information all along. Again, it just depends on the program. So for some of our programs, it's, like I said, how many people they encounter, how many public education pieces are they sending out, how many people are they providing case management to, how many are they connecting to resources. In some cases, we are looking at how many businesses have they connected with, or literally there is a survey connected with the service. You were talking about Cure Violence Global and people not knowing what that is. I completely understand, because I didn't know what it was before I had the job with the city either. But one of the things that they do really well is looking at data. And if you look on their webpage, they talk about how the program, when followed with fidelity in other places in the country, have actually reduced
I'm sorry,
shootings.
Followed with what?
Fidelity. Like if you actually follow what the model is,
Okay.
and don't just kind of choose your own adventure about what your program looks like.
Okay.
So if you actually follow the model, they have shown in other areas that gun violence has gone down, that like carjackings have gone down, that violent interactions have gone down. And it looks different in different cities, because different cities have different types of crime that they're dealing with. We haven't truly followed the model enough here to know if it works.
So is your department at all monitored by this, what's happening with the police and stuff, and they have this whole program they have to follow and an outside monitor does the consent decree, does anything you do interact with that at all?
The settlement agreement and the consent decree are focused on the police. There's a little bit that kind of goes into expectations around how the city in general handles individuals who are maybe having a mental health crisis, and so it gets into some other service areas. But neighborhood safety is not specifically under the jurisdiction of the settlement agreement or the independent evaluators. That being said, I'm actually really glad you asked that question, because I don't think people recognize that when I talk about the community safety ecosystem and the work of neighborhood safety, that it actually is really related to the work of the settlement agreement and the consent decree. They all have to go hand in hand in order for us to have that community safety ecosystem that actually works. And I talk with community members about that all the time. They're like, well, it's great that you offer violence interruption, but if the police show up and we can't trust them, absolutely right. So they're going to work on their stuff. and we're going to provide things that they can't and shouldn't, because I've always thought police can't be everything to everyone.
Sure, yeah.
So we fill in the gaps, and together that's actually is what's going to create a robust ecosystem where people feel safe.
Okay. Well, it certainly sounds like you have a lot going on. One thing I didn't ask at the beginning, do you know what your department budget is and like how many staff it has? Because I don't want to put you on the spot for statistics. If you don't, that's fine. But I just remember hearing how some of those positions that you mentioned earlier were getting hired, and I think your predecessor kind of complained about getting people. So I'm just wondering how many people are in the department now, not including like all the vendors and stuff, and are you fully staffed now, ready to go, or is there still work being done?
So the last time I checked, we had 17 staff members, which is significantly more than there were before. We have 2 positions that we're hiring for currently, one that would oversee our group and gang violence programs, and one that would actually do some of those services themselves. And then we have 2 positions that I've just asked to be put on hold since I'm new, so that I can get a handle on if we need them or not.
Okay.
So we're almost fully staffed, but 17 is a pretty good sized department, I think.
All right. I just wanted to jump back to something you said about the pilots. They're going to be run out of the new community safety center. Is that right?
So the dispatch office that I talked about is currently out of the Lake Street Safety Center, and then when the South Minneapolis Community Safety Center is built, which will be the permanent location, the dispatch center will be out of that safety center. But the safety ambassadors are intended to be on the street during their shift. And the safety centers are great if they have to use a bathroom or eat lunch, something like that.
Okay. So if I'm a business owner and I live on East Lake Street and, someone's sleeping on my doorway, do I call 311, or how do I, because you mentioned like there's situations you don't want to call the police, but you maybe want someone to help. So how should someone interact with your department? And
Right now they can't call the safety ambassadors because we still have to hire the dispatcher.
Okay.
And so once the dispatcher is hired and trained, which we're really hoping will be this summer, everything takes longer than I expect.
And that's a city employee, or is that an outside? Okay.
Yep. The safety ambassadors themselves are community vendors, but the dispatcher will be a city employee, actually part of neighborhood safety. Once we have that person hired and trained, then we're going to do a big push out to community with a phone number that they'll be able to call directly. So they won't even have to go through 311. They'll just call the dispatch office directly and ask for what they need, and that dispatcher will have contact with all the safety ambassadors and send the closest one over.
So what if someone wants to learn more about the department or has a question, or just what should they do right now? Do they email someone, or because I don't think you have like a special website or anything like that, do you?
We do have a website that's just for neighborhood safety, and we're updating it as quickly as we can. There's certainly web pages up already about safety ambassadors, about Minneapolis, which is what we call the violence intervention program. There's one for the new master contract, which talks about the pool of providers that we'll have for violence prevention services. So, they can go to the City of Minneapolis website or you can just Google, which is what I do, Minneapolis Neighborhood Safety, and you can find the webpage. There is an email address on there in case people have specific questions, but we're trying to be as transparent as possible by having the web pages up. And as we get the services back up and running, we're actually going to be creating dashboards as well so that people can see the data that we're collecting for themselves. So they don't have to ask me, how are you measuring success? We'll just have it on the website for them to look at.
That, not just for your department, but I've seen they do that for the police department. I mean, that seems like a huge job somehow, like collecting all that data and turning it into like a usable dashboard. I mean, I don't know. There must be some city department that does that, some whole IT division, I would guess.
Well, we have a robust IT department, but there's a lot of data analysts around. We are lucky in the Office of Community Safety to have a data analyst who's been working on that and creating it for some of the departments that didn't have it before. Because you're right, the police have had dashboards and they've had analysts working on that. It's just been more recently that we're starting to add that layer of transparency for some of the other services. And so that'll continue to roll out over time. And I think once it's up, it's pretty automated. It's just a matter of getting it up and, like you said, figuring out what data actually means something to the community too, because we don't want to just throw data out there for the sake of doing it. We also want it to be helpful in telling the story and helping people understand.
So do you think that's 3 months down the road, 6? When would I be able to go see a dashboard?
We're going to roll them out as they're ready. Safety ambassadors, I was talking to somebody about, we'd like to have a month's worth of data before we turn that into a visualization. So we're coming up on a month. So as soon as we hit that month point, we'll get the visualization up. And then the other part that is slow is getting approvals through the city. So it has to go through all of, you talked about data analysts, IT folks, communications folks to say you got this right and it's readable to the majority of people in the city. So it might still be a couple of months until it's up, but we're going to start working on the visualization for that pretty quickly. And then we'll just roll out the rest of them as soon as they're ready.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you again for coming in and explaining all this to me. Is there any topics that you wanted to cover that we haven't had a chance to talk about today?
You actually asked a great question about how the settlement agreement works together. That's the thing that I don't think gets brought up enough. But I think people should learn more about what community safety means, because we've talked so much about public safety in the city before, which people kind of connect with crime and violence. I don't think they fully understand what we're talking about with this broader community safety definition. And I think a lot of people would be on board. So I would encourage people to go look at the neighborhood safety website, look at the Office of Community Safety website, and get more involved with community safety on their own in their communities.
Well, there are these walking groups that have formed, right? Do you do any sort of training for them, or are those people just kind of like out there on their own figuring it out, or how does that work?
Neighborhood safety does not, but the crime prevention specialists with the police department are very involved in walk clubs, walking groups. They'll do trainings. They'll actually come out and do assessments with folks, kind of looking at an alley if it's been problematic and help them figure out, if you cut down this bush, it might be safer, things like that. So the police have some really good resources that they've already got in place to work with community members.
Well, great. Well, thank you.
Yes, thanks for having me.